Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the prioress. We just read about the prioress, so I want to talk a little bit about her. She is a nun, but she's the head of the convent, so she is the nun of all nuns. Although she's not of nobility, she really wants to put off that air that she is, and you can tell that by the description that Chaucer gives of her facial features and her manners and the way she tries to present herself to other people. Remember, all of this is based on his observation, so the way that he's talking about how she's presenting herself is because that's what he's seen. Her name means my lady or wild rose, not a very pious name by any means. She is very sensitive. She weeps for mice and traps or when somebody hits one of her dogs. Chaucer's sharing this information because obviously he's experienced this. So he has experienced or been with her on the pilgrimage at some point where she came across a dead mouse, or when somebody in the party, hopefully not Chaucer himself, maybe struck one of her puppies. So this, without the vocation, but the dogs and the jewelry, they all kind of add into this satire of literature that nuns should not be worried about these things or be conscientious of how they look or their manners or how they're coming off to people. They are supposed to be devout, religious, not materialistic women. Her appearance is they talk about her wimple, and her wimple is the headcloth, the woman's headcloth that kind of draws in around the chin. A well-shaped nose and bright eyes, small mouth, a fine forehead, although it was very, very large. And then her actual clothing is beautiful. But the brooch that she wears, or the pin that she wears, in Latin says love conquers all. I don't know if a nun should be wearing something like that. She is another representation of courtly love. So let's pick up on page 23. And with her, she had another nun, and who was her assistant, and 3 priests. So the nun and the 3 priests, that's all we get about them. We don't get any more description. There was a monk, a splendid sort, a manly man, capable of being an abbot. So a beautiful man who, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Let's go back. There was a monk, a splendid sort, an inspector of his monastery's estate, who loved venery, a manly man capable of being an abbot. He's extremely handsome. He has the ability and the skill to become the head of the monastery, but he loves venery. And venery is another way of saying sexual desire. So he is probably not our ideal clergyman. He had many a dainty horse in the stable, and when he rode, one might hear the bells in the bridle jingle in the wind as loud and clear as the chapel bell in the place where this monk was in charge. As for the rule of St. Maurice or St. Benedict, since it was old and somewhat strict, this same monk let old-fashioned things pass away and held to the ways of the modern world. If you look up, and when you're annotating something, you should look up something like St. Maurice and St. Benedict and find out who they are. St. Benedict was a saint from Italy who was a devout monk who helped really coin the idea or lead the monks into the work and pray lifestyle. St. Maurice is the first disciple of St. Benedict, and he is offered to the monastery by his noble Roman parents as a young boy because they want him to have that same ethic that Benedict instilled. Our monk, though, believes that those are old-fashioned ideals and that they're not really important. He doesn't really follow those. Right now, Chaucer is inserting his own judgment, okay, but it's based on his experience. He didn't give a plucked hen for the text which says that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk, when he is heedless of duty, is like a fish out of water, that is to say, a monk out of his cloister. But he held that text was not worth an oyster. And I said his opinion was good. Why should he study and drive himself mad, always poring over a book in the cloister, or work with his hands and labor as St. Augustine ordered? How shall the world be served? Let Augustine have his labor to himself. Therefore, he was really hard a really hard-riding horseman. He had greyhounds as swift as a bird in flight. Riding and hunting the hare were all his joy. For this he spared no cost. I saw that his sleeves were edged at the cuff with gray fur, and that the finest in the land. And to fasten his hood under his chin, he had a very intricate pin made of gold. There was a love knot in the bigger end. His head was bald and shone like glass, and his face did too, as if he had been anointed. He was a fine, fat lord, in splendid shape. His protruding eyes rolled in his head and glowed like a furnace under a pot. His boots were supple, his horses well groomed. Now certainly he was a handsome prelate. He was not pale, like a wasted ghost. His favorite roast was a good fat swan. His palfrey was as brown as a berry. So this monk is not who he should be. He does everything in his power to be unlike the monks that we as a society, or act like the monks that we as a society believe they should act. He's extremely handsome. He has a dainty horse with bells. All of his physical appearance is of the finest, most beautiful. His sleeves are edged with fur. He obviously is not missing any meals. Monks are supposed to live a very menial lifestyle, whereas they don't focus on materialistic things. They give to others. Instead of having a giant meal, he should be giving that meal to other people who are starving. Chaucer is now demonstrating his kind of use of irony. He selects and arranges his material so that the reader can come to a conclusion about the character. Make your judgment about him. He is a monk. He is supposed to do these things, but instead he's acting in this way. When the monk says that he doesn't approve of the solitary, prayerful existence of a monastery, Chaucer pretends to be convinced that, yeah, this monk is right. Who wants to study and work all day? I would rather go hunting and have fun. He's making a judgment, but he's also giving us insight into who the monk was. Everything that the monk does is a violation of his role. His love for worldly goods and his food and pleasure and dislike of this quiet, hard-working lifestyle shows us how corrupt he really is. There was a friar who was wanton and merry. He was one licensed to beg in a limited area, a dignified man. In all the 4 orders of friars, no one else knew as much about dalliance and sweet talk. So now we meet a friar. He is the male member of a religious order, and he relies solely on money people give to him. Okay, the most famous friar is St. Francis. He's carefree and happy, and dalliance is flirtation. So he uses flirtation and sweet talk to kind of get what he wants. He is jovial and pleasure-loving. He had married off many a young woman at his own expense. He was a noble pillar of his order. So what Chaucer is saying is that he has maybe been with young women and gotten these women into difficult situations, and he has had to find husbands for them very, very quickly. Think 9-10 months quickly. Chaucer then inserts obviously some sarcasm when he says he was a noble pillar of his order. He was a well-beloved and familiar figure among the franklins all over his part of the country, and among the respectable townswomen too. For, as he himself said, he had powers connected with confession which were greater than those of a curate, since he was a licentiate of his order. Most sweetly he heard confession, and his absolution was pleasant. He was an easy man in giving penance, where he knew he would gain a good pittance. For to give to a poor order is a sign that a man is well shriven. If one gave, the friar could swear that he knew that a man was repentant. Many a man is so hard-headed he cannot weep, although he is very sorrowful. Therefore, instead of weeping and praying, men can give silver to the poor friars. His cape was always stuffed full of knives and pins to give to fair young wives. Certainly, he could carry a merry tune. Well could he sing and play a fiddle. His ballads absolutely took the prize. His neck was as white as the fleur-de-lis. Moreover, he was strong as a champion. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid better than a leper or a beggar woman. For it is not fitting for such a respectable man as he in his position to be acquainted with sick lepers. It's not right. There is no profit in dealing with such paupers. But with the rich in the sellers of food, and in general, wherever it might be profitable, he was courteous and humbly serviceable. There was nowhere a better man. He was the best beggar in his house, and gave a definite rent for his area. None of his brethren came into his domain. For though a widow might not have a shoe, his in principle was so pleasant that he would still get a farthing before he went. His takings were a good deal better than his rent. He could wanton as if he were a puppy. He was a great help with legal settlements. At these he did not look like a cloistered monk with a threadbare cloak, as a proper scholar does, but more like a master or a pope. His robe was made of double worsted and was rounded like a bell right out of the mold. He affected somewhat of a lisp to make his English sweet upon his tongue, and when he harped at the end of a song, his eyes twinkled in his head just like the stars on a frosty night. This worthy, licensed beggar was called Hubert. We get a lot of information about the friar, so that we can assume that Chaucer had a lot of runnings in and spent a lot of time with him, so much so that we actually get a name. His name was Hubert. So let's talk a little bit more about our buddy the friar. They talk a little bit about how he, instead of giving penance for someone going to confession, he says, you don't have to pray. If you just give me money, God will forgive you. Our vocab word pittance comes in right now. He understands that some people can't weep for their sins and that they'd rather just get it off their chest by giving him what he wants. His cape is full of knives and pins that he gives to young wives. He sings and plays the fiddle. It also talks about how he knows the taverns very well and all the barmaids. A friar is supposed to spend their time with those people who are on the outskirts of society, helping them, keeping them safe, providing food for them. The friar himself not giving anything, not keeping anything that somebody else could use. If you go back and look at St. Francis, he spent his time with lepers and beggars. That's what he's supposed to do. That's what friars are supposed to do. This guy doesn't have any time for those people. Who wants to hang out with lepers and beggars? I would rather, or the friar would rather, hang out with people who had fun and could obviously, he could flirt with, or he could drink with, or he could eat with. He didn't believe it was fitting to hang out with such lowly people for a couple of reasons. Socially, it wasn't acceptable, and because there was no profit in him. He's really about making money, okay? He makes the most amount of money out of every friar, but he doesn't give it to the people that he's supposed to be giving it to. He takes it for himself. So much so that he is invited to legal battles because he looks like a master or a pope, okay? So Chaucer, again, has a lot of information about Hubert because he spent a lot of time with him.